All right, well, LA's mayor is already saying, you know, when this crackdown on sanctuary cities, we're not changing a darn thing here. We're going to continue doing what we're doing. This, as the President Attorney General is promising he is going to crack down on that sort of thing. The former U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft on that and these immigration policies that now has the Justice Department doing something silly like enforcing them. Attorney General, very good to have you. What do you make of this and this battle that's brewing here?
Well, this is simply a demand or a policy of returning to the rule of law. If there's an imperative to have cooperation between federal and local law enforcement authorities, it's a national security imperative, and that relates to who we have in the country, especially. I'm keenly aware of that when I know who perpetrated the attacks of 9/11 and how many of them were illegal because of overstays or because they didn't comply with the law. So what we're really seeing is the Attorney General of the United States doing what an Attorney General ought to do, and that's to enforce the rule of law.
And how do you enforce it, John? How do you enforce it? What do you do?
Well, obviously, this part of the enforcement is to at least cut off the resources that would otherwise be sent to these organizations from the federal government. And this isn't really novel. This was something that was announced during the Obama administration last summer. And the idea that the federal government should fund belligerent resistance to federal government policies is maybe the definition of insanity. We expect very strange things from government, but funding resistance to what is in the national securities, funding things that enhance the ability of people to disrupt the United States is certainly not something we ought to do. It's totally reasonable to say if you're going to disrupt our ability to enforce the immigration laws, we're not going to fund you. We're not going to send you some of the $4 billion in aid that comes from the federal government to local governmental entities
maybe
for
that's the only
purposes
thing
of
they'll
law
listen
enforcement
to.
and other things.
I sometimes wonder, is that the only thing they'll listen to? Because once it starts happening, then what do you think is going to start happening?
Well, I don't know whether they'll respond constructively to that or not, but I think when Attorney General Sessions makes this statement, he means it, so we're likely to see real consequences. There are proposals in other respects in the Congress and from thoughtful people that would provide liability to local governments that release individuals who the federal government has asked for them to retain in custody or to be delivered to the federal government. What you have in these sanctuary cities is the release to the public of convicted criminals and people who have been ordered deported so they perpetrate additional crimes. They release them on the public, but they refuse to release them to the law enforcement authorities of the federal government. Now, if that's not inexplicable, and you know, we should have settled the idea of whether local governments can countermand the supreme law of the land 180 years ago, when in the South we had the effort on the part of states to set aside the federal government's laws, and it was called nullification back then. Obviously, South Carolina and other states didn't want to agree with federal governmental mandates, the federal law, and they sought to nullify the federal law. We settled that. We settled that then, and then settled it again in the Civil War. Especially in national security, in the national security arena, to be able to have either states or local governments say, no, we'll be belligerent resistors. We won't be cooperators in enforcement. It's something that is mind-boggling, and they should pay a price for it. And I think at least the withdrawal of federal government resources for their belligerent resistance is what the first step should be.
Well, the first step, as they say, is on. Attorney General John Ashcroft, thank you very much. Good seeing you again.